By 63, I have come to value the still. Life was calmer than I had thought once I retired and relocated to this little village. The frenzied speed of my early years, the onslaught of obligations, and the din of everyday life had all been memories. Every day was now a rhythm, a serene balance of reading a book by the fire, long lake walks, and garden maintenance. Now little more than a shadow of its former self, the house I had shared with Henry was resonant of years of joy and passion. Without him, I sensed a vacuum that was difficult to overlook since he had been my life for such a long time. Initially, I felt I could fill activities with crochet, reading, and volunteer work. Still, regardless of how hard I tried, loneliness poured in. I had come to accept it. I had convinced myself I was all right. By several months, however, I understood that I could not shake loneliness always there. Still, I had reached acceptance notwithstanding everything. This was my very life. I had been conditioned to accept life has, however, as it usually does, a means of pitching curveballs when you least expect them. This was the evening James came and knocked on my door. Not ready to find him standing there. James, Henry's stepson. Years had gone since last I saw him, yet here he is. He had changed so much 3 years after the funeral. He was just a disturbed teenager full of defiance and rage when I last saw him. But now he was not a child and was standing before me. Taller at 27, more stocky, with eyes that appeared older than his age. Full with a subdued agony I could not miss. "May I come in?" His tone was more quiet than I recall. Although I first didn't know what to say, I couldn't let him go. All things considered, he was family. The family of Henry Runyon. I stepped aside and let him into my home, of course. He entered and I just stood there, staring him for a second or two. Although his presence was known, the person in front of me was in several respects a stranger. He said with his voice almost a whisper, "I didn't know where else same way to turns." I nodded and motioned him into the living room. It was everything I had, little though it was. Though my heart wasn't certain what to do with this new reality between us, I told him, "You're always welcome here." James adapted near instantaneously. Though his visit at my house had commenced as a short-term solution, as the days went by it became obvious he was not the irresponsible teenager I recalled. Though he didn't say many about his life in the years following Henry's passing, I could see he had experienced tough things. The quiet fatigue seems to surround him where the boyish arrogance was lost. Frequently, he would look off into the distance, obviously in other thoughts. Still, his being reminded me of the family I had once knew was somewhat solace. Most of our time was spent together in silence. On certain evenings, we sat in silence, both of us consumed in our own worlds. But there was a quiet change going on between us that which neither of us discussed. Sitting in the living room, the news playing behind us, I first observed it. I looked over at him. We had been sitting in quiet for a few minutes. But he wasn't watching the TV screen. He was staring me. All of a sudden, the air between us felt thick with something unsaid. My pulse started racing. Why was he staring at me like that? Suddenly wanting to escape that strong sensation, I said, "I will brew some tea." But as I turned my back to get the tea, I sensed he was staring at me. Upon my return to the living room, I was conscious of the friction between us in a way I had not known prior. Still directed at me, his eyes were causing a flutter in my stomach. Our legs touched almost electrified me when I sat back down. I began to distance fast, but he did not pull away. The room seemed to have contracted all of a sudden. It was as if we only 2 people existed. I was observant of every move he made and every breath he exhaled. I froze when his hand brushed my own. I must have backed away. I ought to have said to him this was not right and we were unable to cross this line. I let the moment stretch instead, and I did not withdraw when his fingers touched mine once more. "Sorry," he said softly, although I wasn't sure whether he was apologizing for a deeper issue or for physical contact. "Okay," I replied, even if my voice gave out. That wasn't acceptable. None whatsoever. Still, I could not disregard the heat moving through me and my heart rate starting to quicken. The following evening, all was different. Sitting on the couch, we were watching a film. Still, the movie was unimportant. All I could think on was his seating next to me and his hand only inches from mine. Even though we haven't touched, I could sense his warmth. And then his hand swept mine once more, as though pulled by an undetected strength. This time I let go. Our gazes locked, and I could see there's something that set my heart racing, though I could not name it. The instant lingered, and then his lips were on my mouth before I noticed it was not a soft kiss, but rather a fervor, one full with urgency. I didn't draw back even if it was everything I had been afraid of. His touch was frantic. His hands felt warm on my body. It felt like we were both deprived of something we hadn't known we wanted until then. James stayed with me for weeks, and the connection between us grew stronger, undeniable. But every time I felt myself falling into him, I pulled away. It wasn't just the age difference or the fact that he had been Henry's son, it was the fear of what this would mean for both of us. But when he kissed me again, this time there was no hesitation. No fear. Just an overwhelming need that neither of us could control. James wasn't that reckless kid anymore. He was a man, and so was I. And in that moment, I realized what had begun to happen was not something either of us could easily walk away from. It felt real. After he kissed me again, I knew that I had finally summoned courage to embrace what was between us with full recognition and to stop pretending I was fine and did not need him. After we separated, I found it impossible to breathe. The masks were hushed in silence. The very touch of the man sent me sky high and left my head dizzy. "James!" I allowed to fall from my mouth in a breathless whisper. "We can't!" But he did not pull away. Instead, he pressed his forehead to mine. "I don't care," he said in a half-whisper. "I don't care anymore." In the days following this kiss, there was a tension in the air, palpable. We avoided talking about it, pretending like nothing was different even though we both knew it was. I couldn't help but think about what had happened and what it meant. I had spent all this time telling myself that it would be okay, that being alone was okay, and I didn't need anyone else. But now, standing face to face with reality, I was shaken to the core. I'm not even sure what it is I felt for James. But it was real. One evening, after dinner on the couch, he took my hand again. I did not pull away, and he didn't either. Our fingers intertwined on some level, and nothing existed beyond that space we occupied. I could hear his breath against my skin. I could feel the warmth of his skin on mine. "I don't know what this is," I whispered, but a part of my heart knew. I knew what this was. It was something I couldn't deny. Neither was going back.